With no Maxx Crosby, there's no way the Atlanta Falcons can lose on Monday Night Football to the Raiders, right?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can start the season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost a lifetime, 18 plus years now, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong in this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you guys that goes strong with me on this stress-free Sunday, right? You know, no Falcons football on the Sunday, so we're living stress-free. We'll talk about maybe the little stress that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers put on us, but I still appreciate all of you everydayers that make this podcast your first listen or first watch each and every day. And to become an everydayer, all you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today's episode, we are giving the final preview of this Monday night matchup in Week 15 to close out Week 15 between the Atlanta Falcons and Las Vegas Raiders. We'll be talking about the impact of Maxx Crosby's absence. We'll be talking about the impact of Troy Anderson's absence. We'll also talk about, what this game means for this Falcons team, win or lose. We'll talk about potentially the future of Michael Penix. Will the win get the Falcons another, national TV game later this season? All that is in store for you on today's illustrious podcast. But let's start with the news that came out on Saturday that Maxx Crosby, the Raiders' superstar pass rusher, will not be playing in this Monday night game. They are basically shutting him down for the season, dealing with an ankle injury that has been, I believe, bothering him the entire season, basically since like week 3 or 4, where he suffered that injury. And so he's going to have season-ending surgery. Obviously, this is Locked On Falcons. If you want to get more insight on what's going on with Maxx Crosby, Locked On Raiders with your boy Q is going to give you more insight into that. But basically, all you need to know as Falcon fans is he ain't playing on Monday Night Football, and that's a huge blow to this Raiders defense and potentially a big boost to this Falcons offense, right? And so we sit here and go, oh, no Maxx Crosby. Ooh, stress-free Sunday, stress-free Monday, right? There's no chance that the Falcons can lose this game, right? Because you take away the one guy, the one game changer on that Raiders defense, and you take away the potential of this Raiders team to get significant pressure against Kirk Cousins on Monday Night Football. And we've seen the majority of Kirk's interceptions this year and turnovers this year have come when he's pressured, right? But 5 out of his 8 interceptions, at least according to PFF, over the last 4 games have come from clean pockets. And that is a testament to Kirk forcing things. So just because Maxx Crosby is not going to be applying pressure to Kirk Cousins on Monday Night Football does not mean Kirk is going to play mistake-free. But we say the hopes, spring eternal, and we hope that Kirk will play a cleaner game than what he has done over the last month. But we'll see what the Raiders do to sort of deal with it. I looked up the one game that Maxx Crosby missed was against the Browns in like week 3 or 4 this year, and they got a ton of pressure in that game. Like Tyree Wilson and Christian Wilkins and other people went off in that game, and they pressured Deshaun Watson a bunch in that game, despite not having Maxx Crosby on the field. So it's not one of those situations where it's just like, oh, well, okay, no Maxx Crosby, no sweat, no problems, all that sort of thing. And the other thing that was interesting in doing research for this matchup was it's not the Minnesota Vikings that you would assume. If I ask you who leads the NFL in the most cover zero blitzes, is not Minnesota. It's the Las Vegas Raiders. But we saw the Falcons unveil an somewhat effective answer for the Vikings cover zero blitzes that they showed. It wasn't consistently effective because Kirk threw an interception on one and another one got sort of tipped at the line of scrimmage and whatnot, but they did burn them on the first one they did. So we'll see if they can burn this Raiders team on their cover zero blitzes if they bring that. But obviously, as I said, a little less stress. The one thing that I was, again, I can't speak for you guys, but the one thing that I was concerned about with Maxx Crosby potentially playing in this game was that sort of sack strip fumble. That would be the thing that was going to be the difference in this game. That's going to be the sort of turnover, as we talked about with your boy Q on the Crossover Thursday. Sort of, one of the keys to victory is winning the turnover margin for two teams that have consistently lost the turnover margin this season. The Raiders constantly turn the ball over a bunch. The Falcons have certainly turned the ball over a bunch a lot this year. And the Raiders do not generate a ton of turnovers, but with Kirk Cousins and his statuesque ability in the pocket and Maxx Crosby bearing down on him, it felt like that was a sack fumble waiting to happen. And so at least I have less concern about that. Not saying zero concern about it, but less concern about that. And as I said, this game, I think is going to be closer than people realize. Someone asked me over the weekend, are the Falcons going to blow out the Raiders? And I'm like, I don't think they are, right? I think these, as I talked about with Jarvis Davis last week on Friday's episode, I think these are, when you start looking at the stats, these are two relatively evenly matched teams. Like all the things that the Falcons are bad, the Raiders are bad in, the Falcons are also bad in, third downs, red zone, all that stuff, defense and whatnot. These two teams are kind of the same. The one big difference between these two teams is we know that the Falcons' offensive ceiling is much higher than the Raiders' offensive ceiling. Like the Raiders have scored 24 or more points twice this year, and one of those included scoring a bunch of garbage time points in a loss to Cincinnati. It's basically that week 2 win against the Ravens where they scored 26 points, inexplicably that week 2 win against the Ravens. Outside of that, the Raiders offense most weeks kind of maxes out in that 17 to 20 point range. And we know that the Falcons offense doesn't max out in that range, but certainly over the last couple of weeks, they have kind of maxed out in that range. They've been averaging about 14 points a game over the last 4 games. And it's been 7 weeks since they scored more than 30 points in a game. And so if this offense continues to struggle in the ways that it has over the last month, a 20-17 game is very winnable for a team like the Raiders, even without Maxx Crosby. And so we definitely need to see this Falcons offense get back on track, as we discussed, Jarvis and myself, going into the bye, coming out of the bye, this offense is going to, be the thing that carries this team into the postseason if I'm not going to say if and when, if they make a legit bid for that. And so we've seen this team struggle against, good defenses the last 3 weeks, especially. They have consistently done that throughout the season. They have consistently had most of their success against bad defenses this year, and been averaging, I think, 29 points a game against teams that are, or at least when I looked up the stat 2 weeks ago, bottom 15 in DVOA rankings on defense this year. And the Raiders are one of those teams that last time I checked, they were 27th or something like that, somewhere in that range. So, we'll talk later about what this game means, win or lose for the rest of the season, in the present and future of this football team. But basically this game is kind of the tone setter. So if the Falcons offense can bounce back, get back on track, especially now that they have basically no excuses for not doing this, so against a lowly Raiders defense that doesn't have their bust player and their most effective game changer, this game is sort of the tone setter for what the next, the final month of this season is going to be. If the offense gets back on track, it gives you some hope that, okay, maybe this team can make the push down the stretch to potentially make that playoff run, whether it's winning the division or, pushing for a wild card. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the episode. So that's what's at stake for this game, but we'll talk a little bit more about that on today's episode. But, upcoming, we got to talk about another key defensive player that's not going to miss this game. And this one is not a Raiders player. This is an Atlanta Falcons player. And that is Troy Anderson. And what does that mean for the Falcons' very big Brock Bowers problem? And we'll get into that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. How do you stay cozy during these winter months? For me, it's rocking the hoodie every day. It's getting nice and cozy when the chill gets into the air this time of year. And therapy is a great way to bring yourself that cozy comfort that never goes away, even when the season changes. And positive coping skills I've learned in therapy help me understand that I can only control what I can control. And I use that every Sunday and sometimes even on Monday when I watch the Atlanta Falcons. And it helps me work towards making a better version of myself. And I should be thankful for that. And therapy can help you be more thankful in your everyday life. And therapy isn't just for those who, have experienced major trauma. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find comfort this December with BetterHelp by visiting betterhelp.com/lockedon, and you'll get started with 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. And it's the time of year that the college football playoff is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever and bring you that hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff Kickoff Show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon, and then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action by watching the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. So Troy Anderson was declared out for this game on Saturday for the Atlanta Falcons. Another, missed game for Troy, and that knee injury that has been bothering him since week 4. We've basically seen Troy play 2 games since week 4, battling that knee issue. And so won't see him this week. And that's a big blow because, as we talked about with Jarvis Davis, as we talked about with your boy Q late last week, if you aren't caught up on the latest episode of Locked On Falcons, how dare you? Brock Bowers, we had a big Maxx Crosby problem. Okay, don't have to worry about that no more. But we still have a very big Brock Bowers problem. And the Falcons have generally been good against tight ends. If you look at some of the metrics this year, some of that I think is owed to last week, where it's just oh, well, why throw it to TJ Hawkinson when Jordan Addison's wide open 40 yards down the field? But, they have generally fared well against tight ends, but they haven't really faced a guy like Brock Bowers, at this point in time, who's basically a big slot receiver. And as we discussed on last week's episode, if you missed those episodes, the reminder of why this is such a challenge for the Falcons from a matchup standpoint is the Raiders play a lot of 12 personnel, those 2 tight end sets. That's what 12 personnel means. And typically, at least as of late, the Falcons have typically deployed their base defense against those types of looks, right? That's the norm in the NFL. And their base defense typically includes Nate Landman as the linebacker playing next to Caden Ellis, while when the Falcons play their nickel or dime defense, the last couple of weeks has been Troy Anderson in that role, playing next to Caden Ellis. And having Nate Landman play in the base defense would be fine if the Raiders were this run pass team, in terms of how they played, but that's not how the Raiders play. They have the 3rd highest passing rate out of 12 personnel. They have one of the highest passing rates on neutral situations, including on early downs this season. So they're more of a pass sort of team. And it presents the old problem that we've discussed quite a bit on this podcast this season when it comes to this Falcons defense, when it comes to trying to stay ahead of the chains. That if you can basically get a disadvantage because of the coverage limitations of Nate Landman on these early downs, and stay ahead of the chains with positive plays on those early downs, and then you get into very third and manageable, third and makeable situations, right? And it doesn't matter whether it's Aiden O'Connell or Desmond Ridder as the Falcons, as the Raiders quarterback. And at this point, it looks like it's going to be Desmond Ridder, although I think Aiden O'Connell is officially a game time decision. But if you get those guys in a bunch of 3rd and shorts, it becomes infinitely easier. And that's how, a quarterback, a low level quarterback, if you want to say those guys are that, can find ways to convert because they're constantly able to get in 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 1 because the Raiders are able to stay ahead of the chains because they can throw the ball on those early downs and potentially run the ball as well. And so this is a big dilemma for the Falcons, right? Their Maxx Crosby dilemma was just let's just throw bodies at him and hopefully that'll stop him. Their Brock Bowers dilemma is a similar issue. Is it's are we just going to throw bodies at him? And as we discussed with Jarvis Davis, the world's biggest Nate Landman fan, other than Nate Landman's grandmother, no one's a bigger fan of a football player than their grandmother. But Jarvis, as the second biggest Nate Landman fan, was no, this is, we know Nate Landman can't handle that situation. He's not one of the bodies that you throw at him. And so, if Troy was healthy, he would be one of those bodies. He would be one of the better options for this Falcons defense, given his athleticism and whatnot. But, that's going to be a challenge. And is one of those bodies the other linebacker that replaces Troy Anderson, presumably J.D. Bertrand, right? Who hasn't played on defense since week 8, has been dealing with concussion issues and he did play last week against the Vikings, but exclusively on special teams. And so do you throw him back into the fire like we saw at times during Troy Anderson's initial absence, over that first month that he missed time, where you did see, Nate Lamb and J.D. Bertrand kind of in and out of lineup, rotating, platooning and whatnot next to K. Nellis. And J.D. Bertrand brings a lot more speed to the table. No one's sitting here going to tell you that, J.D. Bertrand's going to lock down Brock Bowers, but I feel a lot better about J.D. Bertrand than I do Nate Lamb in that situation. The other option for the Falcons is to, just play nickel against them or dime against them. And as discussed briefly on Friday's episode, the Falcons, that was a contributing factor to why the Falcons, struggled to stop the run. And that's a way that, Sincere McCormick, when the Raiders do run the football, if they play nickel, they'll be softer against the run theoretically. And so the Raiders will find more success with that. And then, again, you still don't solve the second linebacker problem. Again, you're still in the same predicament, whether you're playing base or nickel. And so really the solution to that problem is to take that linebacker altogether off the field by playing dime with 6 DBs. And the dime back for the Falcons has been Kevin King this year. He has been asked in those situations to often cover the tight end, given his superior size. And so do you trust Kevin King to play a much bigger role this week as that sort of dime safety, dime corner, whatever you want to call it, dime DB, that can hold his own against Brock Bowers? Again, I don't trust Kevin King, but I trust him more than the other options that we've already discussed in Nate Lamb and J.D. Bertrand. Do you trust Justin Simmons? Basically, when you do play base defense or nickel or whatever, and Nate Lammons on the field, is basically Justin Simmons' job to basically be the Brock Bowers eraser. And do you trust him? And it's like, again, I don't fully trust Justin Simmons, but I trust him more than some of the other options. So this is going to be a legit problem. And as Jarvis and I discussed on Friday's episode, it's kind of just the idea. You just throw stuff at a wall. If you're Jimmy Lake, the Falcons defensive coordinator, you just throw stuff at a wall early in the game, see what works, and then make an in-game adjustment and just keep going with that. But again, this speaks to what we've talked about for some time now, when we talk about, the Falcons not necessarily being a fully formed team at this point in time, because they don't really have good options at this point, especially now that, they're dealing with injuries on the defense with Troy Anderson, to really deal with a tight end of Brock Bowers' caliber. And again, you're sitting there saying like, well, Aaron, what teams do have a player that can deal with Brock Bowers? Yeah, that's fair. I'm not suggesting that, every team has, a Brock Bowers caliber eraser, but I'm sitting here going like, you don't have a good option, right? At least, most good teams have at least someone they're like, yeah, Brock Bowers is probably going to get his against this guy, but we at least have a guy that we feel confident can contain this guy. And the Falcons don't really have that guy, unless it's going to be Kevin King, unless it's going to be Justin Simmons, unless it's going to be Troy Anderson. And we know it's not going to be Troy Anderson this week. So we'll see what, plans the Falcons have for Brock Bowers. Again, it's going to be a tall order, but, we'll just see what answer that is. If they can let Brock Bowers go off against them, then that's going to be a problem on Sunday. And that's how the Raiders get past 20-plus points and make this more of a game than what we would hope for. So we'll see if the Falcons can do that and keep Brock Bowers contained. But let's talk about sort of what this game means for the rest of their season. This is kind of a pivotal game, as all these games are down the stretch are for a team that's trying to finish strong and make the playoffs. And we'll talk about what this game means, win or lose, for this Falcons team to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. But first, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app is going to give you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. And why not make your first $5 bet on this Falcons Raiders action, where the Falcons are now 5.5-point favorites, and think in part due to Maxx Crosby's absence. So that line has moved back and forth all week long. And of course, if you're not interested in the Falcon season, you still got the college football playoff coming up, and you can bet any permutation of who you think is going to win it all. Georgia over Texas, Texas over Georgia, Oregon over Georgia, somebody else other than Georgia, maybe all of it's available at FanDuel. So never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So what does this game mean? Now, with a win, the Falcons get that monkey off their back. They break their 4-game losing streak, and they get some momentum, hopefully, to go on this 4-game win streak to close out the season, to run the table. With a loss, simply put, all hope is lost with a loss, right? Their season is essentially over. We could sit here these last 4 losses and say, it's not the end of the year, right? You saw 3 playoff teams. You saw a tough divisional matchup. You don't have to stress to tell yourself that, man, the Falcons probably should have won 1 or 2 of these games, but the fact that they didn't isn't the end of the world, because, at least 3 of these games, they were not the team expected to win that game. And, in a 1-score divisional game, like most divisional games are, it can go either way. And we saw that with the Saints game. And it's like, they played good on offense, but fortunately they didn't finish drives because, Younghoe Koo was missing kicks and whatnot. And so that was a game that you probably play that, 5 more times, the Falcons probably win at least 4 more times and whatnot. But you can't tell yourself that if you lose to the Raiders, right? Like that's all coping mechanism. That's all copium, right? And, you lose to the Raiders. We're probably going to be playing with a 3rd-string quarterback. Again, presumably Desmond Ridder will get the start. And they're also without their best player, Maxx Crosby. You can't convince yourself. The cope, I can't. My brain went from copium to fentanyl, but I probably should not make those analogies. But you know what I'm saying? Like something is bad. Like something is terrible, right? Like that's not copium that you're shooting into your veins. That's straight up fentanyl. But if Kirk lays another egg on Monday Night Football, you can't defend, or at least I can't defend Kirk Cousins, as I have desperately tried these last couple of weeks to defend it, right? Like you lose, again, 9-8 is still on the table if you run the table. And again, that's to me still worthwhile for your football team, given that you haven't had, a winning record in 6 years. But and so based off of that, it wouldn't completely shock me if the Falcons lost this game and Raheem Morris was still stubbornly sticking to Kirk, because it's like, we got to try to win these last 3 games. And I still believe Kirk gives us the best shot of doing so. But there's no reason at that point in time, if you lose this game, to think that you're going to win those last 3 games. And so at that point, that's where, we're calling the lefty, right? Give us a lefty in Michael Penix Jr., Lisan Al-Gaib. But like, even then, like to me, if you make that change to Michael Penix, like to me, you're not really playing for next year, right? You're really playing for 2026. And that to me is one of the reasons why, like, I have not been gung-ho on, making that switch to Penix, because I don't think it's even playing for next year, as I think a lot of people are, right? And we've talked before about how, you hope with this Falcon team that you can build off of whatever version of success that you have this year that is left remaining for the season into 2025, right? That you get year 2 of Kirk, and 3 out of Kirk's like 4 best seasons in his NFL career have arguably come when he's been in the 2nd year with the same offensive coordinator, something he hasn't really experienced that much in his career. Sean McVay in 2016, Kevin Stefanski in 2019, Kevin O'Connell in 2023. You get year 2 of Zach Robinson as that offensive coordinator. Hopefully see him and Kirk having a much more, a less rocky marriage than what we've seen this year, and as we've discussed many times on this podcast over the last couple of weeks. And you're running it back with, basically the vast majority, if not all, of your offensive starters. And so there's real hope and optimism that if all those pieces come together in the ways that we've seen flashes of this year, there's the potential that you could have a top 10 offense next year. And if you do have a top 10 offense, and I certainly understand, why there's a healthy degree of skepticism given what we've watched from this offense the last month, based off of that. But, a top 10 offense not only gives you your best shot of making a playoff run, but potentially making a deep playoff run, which is what we're all hoping to see, that very few of us have any real hopes of seeing this year. But hopefully next year we'll have that chance. And that's something that you've heard me talk about, since March on this podcast, where it's like, it's not really about this year. It's more about what you can do next year. This year is supposed to be the staging ground for 2025 with Kirk Cousins and whatever incarnation of this offense that you're hoping to see. However, if you wind up tossing the keys to Michael Penix, all that's kind of out the window. And again, I know there's going to be a lot of people in the comments and elsewhere that are going to just label me a hater because I just happen to have a slightly different opinion about a football player. And they're just like, well, you just always hated Michael Penix and you just hate Michael Penix and all that stuff. And it's like, no, I'm just spitting facts at you. You just refuse to listen to them because it doesn't agree with, whatever your preconceived bias is. But, there's no reason to think that Michael Penix starting next year, as a full-time starter for the Falcons is going to be anything more than what we have seen from the Falcons the last 6 years, which is probably another sort of 7-10 season inbound, right? And I'd love to be wrong about that, but there's really no reason to think that Michael Penix in his first year as a starter is going to be that, and I know he technically won't be a rookie, but we'll just lump rookies and first-year starters under the same group, to lead a team to the postseason, right? But it's like, oh, but Aaron, we've seen like 3 guys in the last 2 years with CJ Stroud and Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels. And it's like, okay, yeah, you've seen 3 out of 7. But if you go beyond that, that percentage gets lower and lower and lower. And when you do the research on quarterbacks that successfully as rookies led their teams to the playoffs as rookies, almost all of them had like top 5 or top 10 defenses to support them. And we all know that like the Falcons aren't going to have that caliber of defense next year, or at least the odds of them having that caliber of defense, making that type of leap in one offseason is extremely low. But, hope springs eternal and whatnot. And so it's like the 3 exceptions to that, having that elite defense backing them and supporting them are like Jaden Daniels, CJ Stroud, and Andrew Luck. And, I don't think it's a good bet to bet on Michael Penix being that 4th outlier. But, if you're going to bet on him being the next Patrick Mahomes or whatever, or the next Lamar Jackson, MVP caliber quarterbacks, or, the next Jared Goff, I guess, is another good example of a second-year quarterback after a disastrous rookie season with the introduction of Sean McVay there and whatnot. But again, those to me aren't good bets. And so we'll see, what the Michael Penix era is. But that's why I say, like, you're playing for 2026 because, like, 2025 is probably going to be an up and down sort of middle of the road type of season. And then you're hoping it all comes together for Michael Penix in 2026. And at that point in time, you're not guaranteed to have the same pieces intact in 2026 on offense, where a lot of these guys that you're sitting here like, oh, these guys are definitely going to be back in 2025, like Maxx Crosby. I mean, not Maxx Crosby, like Caleb McGarry, like Jake Matthews, like Kyle Pitts. You got to pay, I think you got to pay Drake London, but between now and 2026, Tyler Algier, you don't know if Drew Dalman's coming back next year, let alone you don't even know if Matthew Bergeron's going to be, so there's a lot more potential turnover for 2026. And so that's why it's like, to me, it's like, ooh, if this Kirk experiment derails, again, we'll see how it all plays out, guys. But like, that's why, like, I don't sit here and being like, man, if we just turn to Michael Penix, it's all going to work out. And I'm just like, yeah, it's just so many moving parts, so many things up in the air. It's hard for me to sit here and see like, oh, like if they can't get it right with Kirk Cousins, there's no reason for me to be confident that they can get it right with Michael Penix, given all those moving parts. But we'll see on that. That's the core of why, like, I'm not sitting here pounding the table being like, oh, Michael Penix is going to solve all our problems in the ways that other people are. But we'll see. But obviously, that's the long-term outlook for what this game potentially means. Just basically saying, like, if Kirk and company can't take care of business this week, then, all of that's on the table. All that is sort of up, question marks, and all the things that are up in the air is, I'm not saying it's hopeless, but I'm just sitting here and saying, ooh, it's a lot more tentative moving forward. But we'll see on that. But in the short term, this game could mean that, hey, the Falcons Monday Night Football game this week is not the last time we'll see the Falcons in primetime, because a win, there's been rumors that, a potential win on Monday night against the Raiders means that the Falcons might get flexed in that Week 17 matchup against the Washington Commanders, where, given that the Bucs just blew out the Chargers, and that was the game that most likely that the Bucs were going to lose, and the Chargers were handling business for the first half, and then things came unraveled in the second half of that game. And so, I'm not going to say we can kiss the division goodbye, but it's probably unlikely that at this point that the Falcons are going to win the division. And so their hopes is getting the 7th seed, which is still operational, still up in the air. We need the Eagles to take care of business next week against Washington. And then if the Falcons, basically run the table and beat Washington in week 17 in a potential flex game on Sunday Night Football, they'll have a shot. If they both finish 10-7 and the Falcons hold the head-to-head tiebreaker, they will get in as that 7 seed. So that is still an option at this point in time. It's not over at this point with the Bucks win. I just want people to know that. But, it's not, to me, as simple as, the Falcons win on Monday night. That game is going to get flexed. I think Wednesday is the deadline for when that week 17 game can be decided. And there are other games that are up in the air, Denver versus Cincinnati, Arizona versus the Rams or whatnot. And again, I think those games have less playoff implications than potentially Falcons Commanders does, assuming the Falcons win on Monday night against the Raiders. But at least on the surface, based off of how we've seen the Falcons play in recent weeks, like those other matchups seem just more compelling on the field, even if they don't necessarily have the playoffs. So I don't think it's as simple as, hey, the Falcons win, they get flexed to Sunday night in week 17 against the Commanders. I think they have to be impressive in their way, or at least somewhat entertaining in their way. It can't be, it can't be a 14-13 slogfest, I think. And the Falcons will get automatically flexed in that game. So that will be something to keep an eye out. But obviously, we can't count our chickens before they hatch. We just got to win this game, no matter how pretty, how ugly, whatever it is. Just walk away with a W in your hopes and dreams for this Falcons season, finishing strong, remain alive. If they lose, it's all over. And, we're in off-season mode. So that is it, guys. Appreciate you for tuning in on another Sunday evening or Monday. If you're listening to this on the audio feed, of course, you can get it on Sunday evening on YouTube. You get it the night before the audio drops. And check us out as your first listen on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you check out all the great content over at Locked On NFL, 2 show daily to get you caught up on all of this weekend's action. And of course, you can find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.